Chapter 8. Ariana POV. How did I end up in this situation? I sat there and stabbed my sausage as I listened to the conversations. I can't believe I finally got to meet you, Papa, Noah said as he happily sat on the lap of the guy who claims to be Alistair. Your husband is really handsome, Arya. I can't believe you didn't even bother to show us his picture. Livia, one of the models, pouted, and I wanted nothing more than to get away from this mess. I looked at my watch and sighed, annoyed. Of course the time will go painfully slow. I never thought that Alistair will introduce himself to Noah as his father. I swear, if he is trying to hurt my baby boy, I will kill him slow and painful. Noah, on the other hand, was so happy when he knew the news. It was such a beautiful sight, and for the sake of my son, I hoped he is the real father. But that vision, what was that? Did I really see that? Am I going crazy? Flashback. After the magical Cinderella dress change, Alistair leads me to the party room. Well, I lead him since he had no idea where we have to go.
Loosen yourself up, my queen. You are too tensed.
He suddenly whispered in my ear as I shivered. Reaching the hall, I sighed in relief. It was such suffering walking with him all alone. I thought my heart was going to explode. Mommy! I heard my baby boy shout, making me smile. Noah! I said as I kneeled. He wrapped his hands around my neck and hugged me. Mommy was so pretty at the stage. The prettiest of all, he said as he cutely threw his arm in the air. What about now? Mommy not pretty enough? I fake pouted at him. No, even now. Mommy is always the prettiest for me, he said, kissing me on my cheek. I kissed back on his as he giggles. He then looked behind me and his eyes widened. Mister! He said, surprised before giving a huge smile.
Hey, kiddo, but can I tell you something?
He asked as my son nodded eagerly.
I'm not Mister. I'm your daddy.
Alistair said as my eyes widened. I saw my child froze in his place and stared at the man in the blue designer tux. I stood there nervously, not knowing what to do. How will he react? Even if I never knew who his father was, I always made sure he would never hate his father. But he has never met his father, and now a complete stranger stood in front of him claiming to be his father. What is your name? My son suddenly asked.
Alistair,
he said with a neutral face, but his eyes showed a different emotion. It was nervousness, fear, and longing. Mommy, is this the same Alistair who you told me? My daddy? Noah asked, turning to me. I suddenly felt like I was trapped in a deep hole. I looked from my son to Alistair. I don't know what to say. Should I say no? But what if he really is? Should I say yes? But what if he is not? I looked at my child as he looked at me with those wide, beautiful blue eyes. He has longed for his father, and yet he never complained. But now, a man is in front of him. He says he is his father. I could see my son's expectation through his eyes. Yes, I said, surprising myself. I looked at Alistair in shock at my answer. His face suddenly shone with happiness, and I felt myself feel happy on the inside. Sudden sniffles filled my ears, making me look down. What happened? I said, going on my knees. Alistair, too, was next to him within seconds.
Why are you crying, my son?
He asked as Noah looked up at him. I have a daddy, he said as he suddenly jumped and hugged Alistair. My heart warmed and I felt happy when I saw Alistair hug him back. His eyes were filled with tears and he didn't mind a few drops to fall as he hugged him tighter and tighter. He raised his head and looked at me with such a pure and innocent expression. My heart skipped many beats as he extended his hand to me. I stared at it and debated whether to grab hold. I gasped as I felt a headache. Sudden, a vision filled my mind. I saw a man kneeling in front of me, but it was like a 3D version of a man's shadow. He talked about how I was the love of his life. He complimented me and said his life was incomplete without me. His hand was extended to me and I felt my hand move on its own. My hand intertwined with his as I heard him mutter,
I love you.
Snap! A click of a camera brought me back from the trance. This is such a romantic couple goal, my boss Juliana said as she examined the photo. I looked back at Alistair and my hand was in his. Noah was smiling as he looked at me with happiness. Let's have lunch. I want to ask you so many things, Juliana said as I quickly removed my hand from his. Come on, Noah. You must be hungry, I said, blushing before making my way to the reserved section. What about Daddy? He suddenly voiced as I turned and looked at him. Daddy is also going to eat with us, I said, sighing as my child jumped in happiness. I'm sitting on Daddy's lap, he shouted as Alistair laughed.
Of course you can,
he replied, making me secretly smile. Chapter 9. Last chapter. Daddy is also going to eat with us, I said, sighing as my child jumped in happiness. I'm sitting on Daddy's lap, he shouted as Alistair laughed.
Of course you can,
he replied, making me secretly smile. Ariana POV. I felt a hand on my thighs, making me look up with shock. He smiled down at me, and once again I felt my heart racing.
What are you thinking, my queen?
He asked as I blushed. Nothing, I murmured as he laughed at my misery. He then whispered something on Noah's ear. My boy giggled and whispered back before showing each other thumbs up. Honestly, I feel scared. They are clearly scheming something against me. I watched with confusion as Noah suddenly got off Alistair's lap and go to Mrs. White.
May I have this dance?
Alistair asked as he stood up and extended his arm. I stared at his hand, shocked and conflicted. The background was filled with giggles and squeal. My son was shouting me to take his offer to dance. I felt myself fall into Alistair's trace as I accepted his offer. The music suddenly changed and I looked at him with confusion. Did you change the music? I asked as he grinned. He took me to the middle of the room and placed his hand on my waist. I put my left hand on his shoulder and he started to sway slowly to the music. I have no idea how to dance because I never have done a couples dance, but somehow my legs were moving on its own. I watched surprised as my body moved perfectly along with him. It was as if my body already knows the steps. The situation I am in suddenly felt familiar. I felt like I had already done this before.
You haven't forgotten the steps, huh? It is just like we used to do. You were so awful in dance, but you were eager to dance with me at your graduation. That day, we danced to the same song as you twirl,
he said as he twirled me around. Now that he mentions it, the song seems familiar, but I know I have never listened to this. I sighed and rested my head on his shoulders. He kissed my forehead and I sighed in content. Why do I feel so relaxed with him? Is it because he is the Alistair that I believe I fell in love with? But if he is, why don't I remember? Why don't I remember this song or the moments he taught me to dance? Does he know the reason? I closed my eyes and gave out another sigh as we kept dancing to the beautiful slow music. I need to ask him. He fell asleep, madam, Mrs. White said as I swiped my baby's bangs away from his face.
It's late. Let's go home,
Alistair said as he picked up Noah.
Arya, you have the car keys, right? I will drive you home,
he said as I nodded. You can go, Mrs. White. Thank you for taking care of him, I said as she smiled. It was a privilege, she said, bowing her head before walking away. I swear she is sometimes weird with her weird old ways.
Let's go,
he said as I followed him to my car. The car ride was in comfortable silence, and at some point in time I fell asleep. But suddenly the brakes were slammed and I felt myself jerk forward. What the hell? I shouted, but immediately looked behind at Noah. My eyes widened as I saw a blue shield protecting him from falling. I looked at Alistair, ready to shout, but he was looking ahead in horror. I followed his direction, and a scream left my mouth as I stared ahead in horror. My house! I shouted as I got out.
Arya, don't go.
I heard him shout, but I ignored him. I ran inside through the broken door and fell on the ground, shocked. Everything was destroyed. What happened while I was gone? Was it a thief? But why would he destroy the place?
Arya, don't run away like that.
Alistair shouted as he came to my side. He quickly wrapped his arm around me and brought me closer as he looked around. Who did this? I whimpered as he cooed at me.
Don't cry, my queen. I will find out,
he said, kissing my forehead. Suddenly, a thug sound echoed the hall. It came from the kitchen.
Stay here,
Alistair said as he stood up. No, I'm coming with you, I said back as I grabbed his hand. He stared at me as if conflicted, but then he sighed and nodded.
But stay behind me,
he said, as I nodded quickly. Suddenly, his eyes shined bright just like the other times. I gasped as he raised his hands, forming a blue orb. He started slowly advancing to the kitchen, and I followed closely behind. On my way, I took a vase, which was lying on the ground. Making way to the kitchen, my eyes widened as I saw a group of men sitting on the kitchen table. They all wore a black cloak, and the hoods were hiding their faces. I felt Alistair tense as his blue orb suddenly vanished.
Hello, Your Majesty,
one of them said.
Elders,
he whispered in shock.